Many players consider Tears of the Kingdom to be the definitive Zelda title to play on the Switch, and if you're looking at it objectively, it makes sense. The few issues that Breath of the Wild had, Tears of the Kingdom fixed, and on top of that, added two massive new areas in addition to the Hyrule we love, being the Depths and the Sky Islands. If someone just got a new Switch and was only able to afford one game to go along with it, then Tears of the Kingdom seems like the obvious choice, as it just offers so much more. But if you read the title of this video before clicking on it, then you will know that I, and I'm sure many others, still prefer Breath of the Wild, and so I wanted to make a video where I really dive into the reasons why I feel that way, and going beyond the obvious nostalgia that we all may have. I want to start by saying that I love Tears of the Kingdom, and when it finally released, I was glued to my monitor until I explored every inch that the game had to offer. And anything I talk about in this video shouldn't be looked at as a problem I have with the game, but rather just a preference. In order to make this comparison fair, I also want to go ahead and mention the obvious pros that Breath of the Wild has that are not really relevant to the comparison of the two titles. First, we need to understand that nostalgia is a powerful form of bias, and while it is critical in forming our favorite games, it can also lead to some really uninteresting video essays, and so I wanted to get it out of the way and say that for the purpose of this video, I'll do my best to just try to look at the games for what they are and nothing else. On that same topic, I also want to say that another reason why Breath of the Wild is such an amazing title is because of the revolutionary shift that it caused in open world games that went on to inspire many other amazing titles. Yes, that is very important when talking about the legacy that this game created, but it is not very relevant to the purpose of this video. Now, before I can start comparing the two titles, I need to first talk about why I love Breath of the Wild and what aspects of the game are so important to me. Overall, the most praised part of Breath of the Wild's gameplay is the discovery of a new world and the beautiful wilderness in which these discoveries take place. Right before this game was released, there was many debates over the Zelda timeline and how each game fits into it. Many players thought that the timeline was an afterthought and was only cobbled together in order to claim that the games had continuity. Some liked the timeline, and others liked the idea that each Zelda game and its world are isolated and all just interpretations of the Legend of Zelda. Regardless, there were some disagreements within the fandom, and this is when Breath of the Wild was released and immediately appealed to everyone. This version of Hyrule takes place centuries after the previous games, in the ruins of a broken Hyrule, providing no clear connections to the previous games. The developers realized that a big part of the player's experience when playing past titles was imagining the stories from the fragments of information they were provided with, and so making this new, fresh, and wild Hyrule was a way for them to bring back that imagination that the timeline and its debates were taking away. This is where that beautiful wilderness and that feeling of discovery come into play. The world is in ruins, and you wake up 100 years after what caused its downfall. This Hyrule is new to everyone and is begging to be explored, hiding secrets behind every corner. The unique art style that it brought, as well as the amazing sound design team, really captured what wilderness feels like without the use of hyper-realistic characters and insane graphics. The way of learning the story and lore of the world was also perfect in this game, as piecing together the memories out of order and creating the story in your head only adds to what the developers sought to do. The method of finding and locating these memories just adds to the exploration and discovery that this game already does so well. Having most of the story and conflict be in the past makes the main quest of defeating Ganon not as pressing, because your primary focus is not to rush the castle, but instead to explore every inch of this new world and to get as strong as possible before taking on the Calamity. The characters and races that you encounter are also incredibly fleshed out, making the settlements that they reside in lively and welcoming. But they also don't have too many characters out and about across Hyrule. There are a couple of NPCs on the roads traveling, but for the most part, the wild is isolating in a good way, a peaceful way. This might be one of my weirder takes, but I also like how everyone Link was close to is either a ghost or captured by Ganon. The importance of these connections and the development of these characters, like the champions, are still stressed through the memories you collect, but the fact that they are not with you once again brings back that beautiful isolation as you explore this ruined world. Most of the time that I find myself coming back to play this game is when I'm looking for a nice, relaxing time. Even though that sense of discovery is well gone now after the countless playthroughs that I have done, the world will forever remain the same therapeutic way that it always was to me. While beautiful and relaxing, the world is also dangerous, and all of the enemies found, at least these versions of them, are new and provide their own unique approaches in order to beat them. We can all remember our first encounter with a Lionel, where we probably realized we might need to pay attention to the flurry rush mechanics after all. Also, the concept of the Guardians was something extremely well done in this game. They served as the enemy that you just need to run from until you discover that you can parry their shots. The piano music that plays when they see you and the beeping countdown until their laser fires adds to that dangerous feeling that Hyrule has. I still don't classify Breath of the Wild as a challenging game, especially because of my obsession with the Souls titles, but it also isn't an easy one either. The developers were not afraid of making a couple of fights where you might die a few times before coming out on top. This created the perfect sense of balance for me, where it forced me to engage with the combat and learn all of the great mechanics they added, but also was not nearly grueling enough to take away from that relaxing, breathtaking feeling that the rest of the game provides. Now it is finally time to talk about Tears of the Kingdom, and to start, I want to look at how this game came to be. People obviously loved Breath of the Wild and the new path that the Zelda series seemed to be taking, and so it was obvious that the next game would at least be very similar to Breath of the Wild. This is where my preferences start to show, as in my opinion, Tears of the Kingdom suffered a lot from trying to follow the Breath of the Wild formula too closely, and in many ways was doomed to fall short of Breath of the Wild from the start. Again, to be fair, Tears of the Kingdom did pretty much everything we asked for. We wanted more Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom delivered and then some. It is an amazing game that continues the story we love and returns many players' favorite version of Ganon. It gives us new abilities, new dungeons, and new areas to explore, but some things still felt off to me. First, let's look at Hyrule. While it is now updated with a flying castle and new settlements, it is still the same old Hyrule from the previous game, and to be fair, I think they did a good job, but it still makes exploring Hyrule a lot less fun as we've already seen this land before and probably thoroughly explored it with the 6 years we had until Tears of the Kingdom released. Also, the new abilities such as Ascend and Ultra Hand made traversing the land an absolute joke, because within 5 minutes of getting the ability, you can go ahead and craft the hover bike out of 3 parts and go anywhere you like with ease. Don't get me wrong, these additions of Ascend and Ultra Hand were a good decision because they played extremely well into the new creative approach that Tears of the Kingdom was going for and made traversing the new areas they created much easier. And that leads me into part of the reason why I think Tears of the Kingdom was doomed to come short from the start. The developers needed to keep the Hyrule they had, but also needed to add new areas to keep things fresh. These new areas being the Sky Islands and the Depths. While I love the beauty of the Sky Islands and the eerie vibe of the Depths, they both come up a little short when compared to Hyrule in terms of exploration and discovery. Just think about traversing the Depths without the use of the hoverbike, and you will begin to see that there are many good locations, chests, and things to explore, but for the most part, it is just empty space in between. This goes to show how the use of Ultra Hand and the vehicles it is able to create are necessary for making the Depths feel exciting. The Sky Islands also benefit from these vehicles and contraptions, and while they don't face a problem of having too much ground to cover, they instead face the problem where they don't have enough. And so this places a lot of the responsibility for that feeling of exploration and discovery on a Hyrule that we have already seen. This might be a very niche preference, but I also was not a huge fan of the fuse mechanic because it felt like it took away from that wilderness feel that I loved so much from Breath of the Wild. Don't get me wrong, it fits in great with the creative freedom that Tears of the Kingdom strives for, and being able to make and customize your own weapons on the fly is awesome, but wow, do they look weird. There was something about how clean everything looked in Breath of the Wild, and having both my character and the world look amazing added to the experience, but in Tears of the Kingdom, I always had some weird contraption on my back, like a bomb attached to my shield or a tail on the end of my sword. Yes, you can just not fuse things to the weapons, but then you are doing a very minimal amount of damage and you also have way less durability. Again, these additions are super fun and bomb hopping is incredibly stylish, but I did feel like it took a little away from the vibe that I love so much in Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom also suffered from trying to copy the same memory structure that Breath of the Wild used to tell its story, and this time it felt way more forced and, in my eyes, was not really necessary to begin with. We didn't need to play through the story in the same way that we did in Breath of the Wild, where all of the main lore and plot happened in the past, and it seemed to me like the story and gameplay suffered a bit as a result. To be honest, ever since I saw the announcement trailer for the game's development, I was super excited at the possibility of Zelda playing with you. Yes, this would change the typical plot of saving the princess, but we have seen Zelda games take different directions before, and personally I felt like this could have been interesting to see. Normally, the Zelda approach is to keep the general theme and the three characters the same, but change it up each game in terms of the world, the story, and its mechanics. You may think that they didn't really have that option as Tears of the Kingdom is a sequel, but look at Majora's Mask, which is a sequel to Ocarina of Time. That title has a much different vibe, takes place in a new location, and offers completely new gimmicks, all while keeping its core similarities with Ocarina of Time and having its storyline continue. That is what I wish happened with Tears of the Kingdom. What if Zelda traveled with you and you played a more present-day story where you aren't just learning things from the past? This would certainly take away from the wilderness and isolating beauty, but again, I think that was already fading when they decided to make a sequel with the same Hyrule. The change does not have to involve Zelda playing with you, but I at least thought it would be a cool idea, and I mostly think that the game overall would have benefited greatly from having its story take a step or two away from the Breath of the Wild formula, which would still not harm its identity as a sequel. One of the more praised changes in Tears of the Kingdom came from them taking a step away from that formula, and that is the dungeons that this game features. It still has 4 regional dungeons that Breath of the Wild had, but again they stepped away from making them all too similar, which was a problem that Breath of the Wild faced. Each divine beast had the same color palette, the same lore, and similarly designed bosses. There were also only these 4 dungeons in the whole game until the DLC added one more. I did love how the Divine Beasts fit into the story and how there were weapons used to fight Calamity Ganon, but the problem players had with them was more with how they were the only dungeon experiences in the game and did not have much of an individual identity to them. Tears of the Kingdom fixed this by bringing back the more traditional dungeon designs of the past games, and each one had its own unique layout, gimmicks, and boss to go alongside it. This was probably my favorite part of my first time playing Tears of the Kingdom, as I couldn't wait to see what the next temple offered because they were so unique. Each boss was also designed with care and really added to the climax of each dungeon. Overall, I loved each one, and even though the Colgera fight was way too easy, it makes up for it with one of the best battle themes ever created. Now, what about the rewards you get for completing these temples? Well, I think they're kind of sad when compared to the original champion's abilities we got in Breath of the Wild. I get how they had to go in a similar route, as it would be way less satisfying if we just got a cool weapon or something, but did we have to get the abilities tied to another NPC that I need to chase around whenever I want to activate it? Also, may just be me, but I really did not like being surrounded by 1 to 5 of these spirits at all times, and almost always just turned them all off except for Tulin, as the wind ability was easy to use when you were in the air. These were a massive downgrade to the abilities in Breath of the Wild, and all they needed to do was not tie them to someone else in order to activate them. What if just charging your bow made you able to shoot the lightning bolt and it worked on a cooldown system like the original game? You could hold attack to give yourself the water bubble and crouch or something for the Goron ball. All I am saying is that the abilities themselves are awesome, but were held back a lot from not being able to be used by Link alone. Now, I don't just want to seem like I'm tearing Tears of the Kingdom apart, and so I wanted to mention another phenomenal direction they went, and that would be the final boss fight. I loved the original ending in Breath of the Wild, and it felt like it worked really well. Calamity Ganon required you to know all the abilities that the 4 Blights used, and represented the dark malice that all the other Blights had. He provided a good amount of challenge, and then the final fight against the Dark Beast Ganon gave us the cinematic end to top it all off. To be honest, if you asked me a couple years ago if I would have done anything different, I probably would have asked just for the fight to be longer. But then Tears of the Kingdom came out, and we had the return of Ganondorf. This game gave us an amazing final battle, as it made me realize an issue I never thought about in the original game, and that is the lack of sword fights with actual humanoid creatures. This Ganondorf fight provided just that, and it scratched an itch I never knew I had. The fight is kept fresh with the constant switching of weapons, and I audibly gasped when I saw him flurry rush me. This fight was everything I could have asked for in a final battle for a Zelda title. Then there's the cinematic end, which also slightly exceeds Breath of the Wild in my opinion, mostly because it involves Zelda more, and the sky is just a crazy cinematic way to end such a great game. This video is still about why I prefer Breath of the Wild, so let's get back to some of Tears of the Kingdom's shortcomings. Do you remember when I talked about how great the enemy variation was in Breath of the Wild? Well, in Tears of the Kingdom, it only got more diverse while keeping all of the previous overworld enemies and bosses, and even updating some of them. The issue I had was that all of the main enemies are still bokoblins, moblins, and lizalfos, and they make up around 70% of the fights that you will have. I will call them the big three for convenience's sake. They did add new variations like the boss bokoblins and those guys who just throw stuff, but we did see all these enemies before, and so it felt a little underwhelming for those 70% of fights. The other 30% with the new bosses, enemies, and reworked fights were great, but I really think Tears of the Kingdom could have benefited from adding a fourth type of enemy into the existing big three. An enemy that would be seen just as much, and don't say that the hoblins are like this because we all know we only rarely see them in caves. Then there is the difficulty aspect of Tears of the Kingdom. I never got that same feeling of traversing a dangerous world that I did in Breath of the Wild, partially because I was already familiar with the combat and some of the enemies, but also because of how the creative freedom you have trivialized the combat. In Breath of the Wild, elemental arrows and weapons were sought after not only for their super cool designs, but also because they were incredibly useful in combat. You could split up enemies by freezing them or stealing their weapon by shocking them. There was a reason why these elemental damage types were harder than your traditional weapons to get. This is also the reason why elemental rods had the downside of low damage and durability as a way to balance them. Tears of the Kingdom throws that out of the window by allowing players to just stick any fruit to the end of their arrows or just attach a random icicle to their stick and boom, you get elemental damage. You also just have a much easier time getting high damage weapons, as you will always have the monster parts to add to any weapons you find, which basically gives you infinite great weapons. While I still did enjoy this system, and it certainly made my fights more fun as I bomb hop around, but it certainly takes away from that dangerous feeling that Breath of the Wild provided. I will note that this fuse feature did have a hidden bonus, and that was providing additional utility to all of the monster parts you collect, as in Breath of the Wild, all I ever did was sell them or use them as gas for my master cycle. Then there are the Zonai and everything that they bring with them. They were pretty much added to fill the role that the Sheikah did in Breath of the Wild, only I didn't like them as much. Their lore and the story that accompanied it were interesting and cool, but it was mostly the constructs that felt like bootleg guardians. Again, there was no need to translate every design choice that was in Breath of the Wild. The Sheikah and their technology still exist in Tears of the Kingdom, and so I felt like there was no need to make another system just like it. The Zonai, as well as their shrines, devices, and lore, also added to the clutter issue I have with the game, which plays a big part in limiting that exploration and wilderness that Breath of the Wild had and I loved. Tears of the Kingdom just added so much, and it got to a point where it wasn't necessarily overwhelming, but there were certainly multiple things to choose from at every given point in the game. Part of why I love Breath of the Wild is that you don't always have something to do. Yes, the world is filled with activities, but it also has its moments where you are not currently working through a puzzle or fighting a camp, but rather just walking in a direction you haven't really explored before. Tears of the Kingdom always had puzzles and objectives to do everywhere, and that ooh, what's that feeling that people love so much about Breath of the Wild felt a little overdone to me. A lot of this just boils down to what you value more in these two titles. I personally fell in love with Breath of the Wild for the calm, mysterious world that it had waiting to be discovered. But if you value the creative sandbox and the endless things to do that Tears of the Kingdom provides, then that also makes complete sense to me. I really just wanted to talk about these two games that I love, and why Breath of the Wild will always be special to me in ways that Tears of the Kingdom could not replicate. I personally cannot wait to replay both of these titles yet again when their Switch 2 versions release, as I can never find myself getting tired of either of the experiences they provide. That brings me to the end of the video. I wanted to thank anyone who stayed to the end and know that I really appreciate the support. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more video essays on various topics, consider liking and subscribing, as I have a lot planned. Also, please let me know your own thoughts on this matter in the comments below, as I know with these titles especially, everyone's experiences are different. With that, thank you all for watching, and until next time.